David Rockefeller. Born June 12, 1915, in New York City. Last surviving grandson of oligarch John D. Rockefeller, is dead. We are told he died in his sleep at the age of 101, on March 20th, and with him the third generation of the infamous Rockefeller dynasty is at an end. So what does it mean? How do we measure the life of someone who has shaped the modern world to such a horrendous extent? One measure of a man, some would say, are the friends that he leaves behind. In that regard, consider the people who are now stepping forward to pay tribute to David Rockefeller's life. The Clinton crime family states, David Rockefeller was a consummate businessman, a great humanitarian, and a serious scholar. He was a kind, good man to all who met him. Hillary and I are grateful for his friendship and his remarkable life. And the Bush crime family stated, so many knew him as one of the most generous philanthropists, and brightest points of light, whose caring and commitment to the widest range of worthy causes touched and lifted innumerable lives. David was also very active in national and international affairs, and his connections and keen aptitude for issues made him a valuable advisor to presidents of both parties, yours truly certainly included. And the Council on Foreign Relations Crime Syndicate. Mr. Rockefeller was the longest-serving member of the council, joining in 1941. He served on the board of directors for 36 years, 15 as chairman. In recognition of Mr. Rockefeller's many intellectual, financial, and leadership contributions, the council's flagship studies program, a world-renowned foreign policy think tank, was named in his honor. As much as the testament of the likes of Bush and Clinton, and the CFR arch-criminals who have left a trail of death and destruction in their wake, tells us about the kind of person Rockefeller attracted to him. There is another dictum which seems even more apt: the measure of a man is what he does with power. Surely, few men in history have been a steward of such vast wealth, and, by extension, held so much power. Chairman and CEO of Chase Manhattan. Chair of the Council on Foreign Relations. Founder of the Trilateral Commission. Founding member of Bilderberg and advisor to its steering committee. In fact, the dizzying array of banks, corporations, think tanks, foundations and supranational organizations of which David Rockefeller was a member does not even tell the full story of the power that he wielded. Having learned a valuable lesson about power and wealth from his grandfather, he was always careful to portray himself more as an observer of events or minor participant in the organizations and movements that he in fact founded, funded and brought to fruition, to be on the safe side and pretend he had nothing to do with them in the event that any of these foundations should receive any harsh public criticism, or accusations of the obvious.
Dick Cheney takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americans. The subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.
Rockefeller's role in the drive for an FTAA was a lot more central than he portrays. Rockefeller cultivated Latin American leaders who could be counted on to support such a proposal. Both the 1994 Miami Summit and the FTAA proposal were conceived and nurtured by a Rockefeller-created network. Prominent among the organizations sponsoring the Miami event were the Council of the Americas, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller, the Americas Society, chairman David Rockefeller, the Forum of the Americas, founder David Rockefeller, the Institute for International Economics, financial backer and board member David Rockefeller, the Trilateral Commission, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller.
Growing up in the household of John D. Rockefeller Jr., steward of the family fortune from Standard Oil, and controller of the infamous Rockefeller Foundation, David and his brothers knew from an early age that they would be future decision-makers without parallel in human history, capable of shaping events not only at home in the United States, but all around the world. Their family has a long history of being masters of deception. David's great-grandfather made a living off of cheating people into buying fake cures to the diseases of the 19th century, one of them promising his patients a cure for cancer. But it was only snake oil in a bottle. His angry victims he ripped off called him Devil Bill. Devil Bill, also known as William Rockefeller, was a womanizer and a rapist, and even legally changed his name once his crimes caught up with him when he was on the run. He raised David's father's father and uncle to think the way he did as a businessman. David's grandfather raised his father to be the same way too, and David inherited this pattern of manipulation and compulsive lying with a straight face. But it wasn't only Rockefeller blood flowing through the veins of David and his brothers. Their mother, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, was the daughter of Senator Nelson Aldrich, one of the most powerful and influential politicians of his era.
And then, of course, your mother, and you wrote so lovingly about both of them, but your mom was a member of the Aldrich family, and that was, among other things, a very powerful political family. And I know that in my reading and teaching of American history, Senator Aldrich was a major force in America 100 years ago.
That's true. He was senator, United States Senator for 33 years, and was the leader of the House for, rather the Speaker of the Senate for a number of those years. So he did play an important role in American foreign and domestic policy during that period. Unfortunately, he died, as did three of my four grandparents the year that I was born, so I never met him. But my mother greatly admired him and traveled with him a great deal, and I always felt very proud of what he did in the Senate.
David's brief description glosses over the truly central importance of Senator Nelson Aldrich, referred to by many as the general manager of the nation. As a key figure on the influential Senate Finance Committee, Aldrich oversaw the United States national currency. In 1910, it was in this capacity that he presided over a secretive Jekyll Island conclave with the nation's richest and most powerful banking interests of the 20th century. It was in that very meeting, undertaken in complete secrecy and hidden from the public, that founded and eventually gave birth to the Federal Reserve System itself. Indeed, it is in the marriage of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s wealth and business influence with Abby Aldrich's banking and political influence that we can best understand the world-conquering dominance of the brothers' generation of the Rockefeller clan. Their entire lives, David and his siblings were enveloped in the cocoon of wealth which came with their Rockefeller-Aldrich heritage. Never without the assistance of their army of valets, nurses, chambermaids and servants who were available to attend to their every whim. Even their childhood games were played in the secure comfort of luxury. David and his brothers would roller skate up Fifth Avenue to school every morning, closely followed by a chauffeur car in case they got tired. It was from within this pampered bubble of unreality that David Rockefeller began to form his understanding of the world, and his own place in it. When he went to college, there was no question that he would attend the most elite. He studied English history and literature at Harvard, earning his bachelor's degree in 1936, began his graduate studies in economics at the London School of Economics, and in 1940 completed his PhD at the University of Chicago, the school his grandfather had established. But, to the surprise of no one, the University of Chicago favorably had published its founder's grandson's thesis he wrote on unused resources and economic waste. And then the young heir to the Rockefeller throne was given a position as a secretary for the mayor of New York who, at the time, was Mayor Theodore LaGuardia. Pressed on the matter, Mayor LaGuardia insisted that David was just one of 60 interns working for him and was given no special treatment. But he neglected to mention that this particular intern was given the use of the deputy mayor's office. It was also no surprise that, enlisting in the army in 1943, Rockefeller was promptly promoted to captain and assigned to military intelligence, where he drew on his family's own international network of contacts to set up a political and economic intelligence unit.
After finishing school and marrying Peggy in 1940, then you became part of the military during World War II. If I'm not mistaken, weren't you down here briefly in Miami?
I was. As a matter of fact, After my basic training, I was sent here to the guard and administrative attachment of the Latin American intelligence unit that was based in Miami. So I remember my principal responsibility was guarding the property of the Firestone estate, where the principal threat, as far as I could see, was falling coconuts. But luckily, I was never hit by one.
And that marvelous estate sat where the Fontainebleau is today. In fact, when they built the Fontainebleau in the early to mid-50s, they built it around the estate, then they leveled the estate. Right. That's a pretty nice tour of duty, actually.
Well, that's true. It was.
Really.
Apart from falling coconuts, the special privileges of being a Rockefeller sheltered David from what other, less privileged men were forced to witness in the horrific times of war. With his perspective of the reality distorted, David calls World War II a good war, in his memoirs. Men of my generation often refer to their military service as good or bad. I had a good war. I had been confused and apprehensive at first, but soon learned to adapt and then how to use my newly acquired skills effectively for the benefit of my country. I look back at the war years as an invaluable training ground and testing place for much that I would do later in my life. Among other things, I discovered the value of building contacts with well-placed individuals as a means of achieving concrete objectives. This would be the beginning of a networking process that I would follow throughout my life. World War II left hundreds of millions of people dead. Europe a smoldering pile of rubble, and Japan a radioactive wasteland. But it had taught David Rockefeller about networking, so it was a good war. It seems this was the stage when David's sensitivity towards the lives of the individual had eroded away. In fact, one of the unspoken business partners of IG Farben, a German corporation which made explosives for Nazi Germany, was Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The German Air Force could not operate without a special additive patented by the Rockefellers. So the Nazi bombing of London in 1940 was made possible by a $20 million sale of fuel provided by none other than the Rockefellers. More than 400 were killed and 1,600 injured that night. But the war was keeping Standard Oil in business, so yes indeed, David had a very good war. But, after David was finished playing war, he wanted a career. Unsurprisingly, his key networking opportunity he was looking for came in the form of his own uncle, Winthrop Aldrich. Uncle Winthrop, as David knew him, was his mother's beloved younger brother, and the chairman of Chase National Bank, whose largest shareholder was David's father, which was popularly known as the Rockefeller Family Bank. Winthrop, we are told, just happened to be traveling through Paris right before David was recalled to Washington and offered him a career at the bank. Meanwhile, David's good war was wrapping up, and his older brothers were busy working to secure a permanent world capital in New York City.
Arriving in New York to choose United Nations headquarters, delegates from 7 nations are welcomed by Grover Whalen. They must choose a site within the New York or Boston areas. The committee calls on President Truman at the White House before proceeding to inspect locations. The eastern United States will soon hold the new capital of the world.
Nelson Rockefeller, a former member of the U.S. delegation to San Francisco, was appointed by New York City Mayor O'Dwyer to interest the UN in building on the 1939 World's Fairgrounds in Flushing Meadow. When the UN rejected this proposal, the Rockefeller family considered offering part of their own estate, Pocantico, and adjoining properties for the headquarters site. No decision had been made when the UN convened in the fall of 1946. The Rockefeller family was more concerned than ever with bringing the UN to New York City. News accounts from the period convey the atmosphere.
As the weary delegates of 54 nations prepare to end their meeting, the world takes stock of recent weeks, highlighted by the beginnings of cooperation. Hopeful signs are the unanimously passed resolution on armaments reduction and atomic controls. And there was big news in the last days as headlines told another story. The gift of a site by John D. Rockefeller Jr. for a permanent world capital in New York. quickly accepted, the strip along Manhattan's East River is valued at $8.5 million. An ideal site for skyscraper headquarters, the 6-block area extends from 42nd to 48th Street.
The Rockefeller family formally presented its gift to the UN in March of 1947.
The future of this country and the lives of our children and our children's children are interwoven with the success of the United Nations. In it lies the hope of the people of the world. My father considers it a privilege to have had a part in the development of its permanent home. I'm glad to hand you, Mr. Lee, my father's check.
Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, Mayor Dwyer, the United Nations extends its sincere thanks to you and to your father for this magnificent gift. We intend to go ahead and create on the East River side a dignified and appropriate headquarters for the United Nations, which will stand for generations to come as a great monument to peace and security. Your family can be proud of its contribution to this cause.
Thank you very much.
The Rockefeller gift changed the course of history and brought the United Nations to New York City. It is a gift which gave practical and moral support to the young United Nations, thus enabling it to succeed where the League of Nations had failed. It is a gift which furthered the United Nations mission to help save succeeding generations from the scourge of war.
In April 1946, while the Rockefeller brothers secured a UN headquarters in New York City for their dream of a global government, David began his work at Chase Bank as an assistant manager in the foreign department. Almost immediately upon arriving, he began the steps to install all the needed preliminaries to allow for an easy transition to a future globalized economy. The brothers worked together, and as his brothers pushed to promote globalization through the UN, David's task in this was to promote globalization through banking.
I felt that since American business, in response to the globalization of the world that was already taking place and the move of businesses in our country abroad in order to take care of the companies that they were dealing with overseas, and that was becoming a major part of their business, I felt that we couldn't do a good job in taking care of our even American customers unless we had branches overseas. So little by little, over a period of about 30 years, we opened branches and offices in about 50 countries around the world, and were represented in other ways in many more than that. And of course, this was once something that was a great interest to me, and therefore I quite frequently would go over to the countries which I thought we should be in and meet with the leaders of the country as well as the business leaders. And this, of course, is essentially the way that I happen to know as many people as I do around the world. And I feel that that was certainly one of the best things I did for the bank.
with the established headquarters of the United Nations in place, and with David working persistently on installing international branches of Chase Manhattan, the gradual creation of what can easily be connected as a one-world government was steadily on its way. Sounding off the death of American independent sovereignty. Everything that America's founding fathers had fought for since 1773 was being unraveled and untethered by the hands of David Rockefeller and his brothers. But whenever David publicly presents the globalization of the banking industry, he talks about it as if it is merely a reaction to the needs of the business world. But when you own the bank, it is impossible to separate the business interests of his bank from his own personal interests, or that of his network of family friends. And, as with so much else in David Rockefeller's world, both these business and personal interests converged at the globalist ideology which motivated him throughout his life. Working his way up the ranks of Chase's corporate ladder to eventually become the bank's chairman and CEO, David soon found himself at the heart of world geopolitics, an unofficial emissary from the Rockefeller family and the banking and business interests it represented, to the rest of the globe. When Moscow opened its doors to the first American bank since the 1920s, it was to David Rockefeller's Chase. When Beijing did the same, allowing the first American bank since 1949, it, too, was opening the door for Rockefeller. When America became embroiled in the Vietnam War, David used the opportunity to open the branch in Saigon. Along the way, David's networking process helped him befriend a rogues gallery of dictators and despots.
You also mention in here an encounter with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, in Baghdad. Was there anything in that meeting some 20 years ago that would have led you to believe that he'd be playing the role he is today?
I don't think so, but in the light of what's happened, it certainly makes it all the more interesting. I did it actually at the request of Henry Kissinger, who was then Secretary of State. I was going anyway to that part of the world, and Chase had business with the leading commercial bank in Iraq, and so I was going for that. And he asked me if I would also go to see him to say that he would like to establish closer touch with the regime. He felt that it was important that our two countries communicated more effectively. I did see him, and he was pretty cold, and he said the only way we could hope to establish closer relations would be if we would discontinue our support for Israel. Well, it was not likely that that was going to happen.
Right.
So it was not a terribly productive meeting, although in the hindsight it was certainly an interesting one.
In 1973, David Rockefeller penned an obituary for communist dictator Mao Zedong, the man personally responsible for more deaths than any other human in history, in which he praised the high morale and community of purpose engendered by Mao's leadership and claimed his bloody dictatorship and slaughter of 60 million of his own citizens to be one of the most important and successful dictatorships in history. A popular joke of the decade held that David Rockefeller never ran for president because he didn't want it emotion. There was more truth to this joke than many realized. He was in fact offered the position of Treasury Secretary 3 times and the chair of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors once, but turned all of these appointments down because he felt he could accomplish his goals more effectively through his bank. But as tireless as Rockefeller was, in his pursuit of globalization, personally visiting 103 countries and racking up over 5 million air miles as he amassed a network of no less than 150,000 contacts for his personal Rolodex, David's ambitions were larger than even he could personally oversee. Like any good crime syndicate leader, he would need a capo. And he found the perfect such vessel in Henry Kissinger.
And you mentioned, David, Henry Kissinger, and I think he first was noticed by the Rockefeller family after he wrote a very erudite work on nuclear weapons and nuclear war back in the late 1950s.
Nuclear weapons and foreign policy.
Right.
Yes.
It was then published, and from that time on, he became pretty close to the Rockefeller family.
Well, he did. Actually, I guess I was the first one who got to know him because He was a member of an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and there was a study group at that time that he, as then a young instructor at Harvard, presided at. And it was a group to study nuclear weapons and foreign policy. He wrote a book about it based on the study. I was so impressed by him that I introduced him to my brother Nelson, who was then governor in New York and was then considering seeking the presidency of the United States. They became great friends, and actually Henry became Nelson's foreign policy advisor as long as he was in public life, and I think is one of the remarkable international statesmen in the world today. Even 30 years after he was Secretary of State, he is still asked by heads of state when he travels the world for his advice.
It was through Henry Kissinger that David Rockefeller could influence policy no matter who was nominally in charge of the country. Only Nixon could go to China, but it was Rockefeller's emissary, Henry Kissinger, who preceded him. And as soon as diplomatic relations were normalized, there was Rockefeller to open Communist China's first American correspondent bank. When Chase needed to prevent its mining interests in Chile from being nationalized by President Allende, Kissinger was happy to organize the coup that overthrew him. The meeting between the mining company and Kissinger was, of course, set up by David Rockefeller. When Nixon fell, Kissinger survived the fallout and retained his position as National Security Advisor to Ford. When William Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, was busy arranging the delayed Iranian hostage release for the 1980 October surprise, he was in secret contact with Henry Kissinger, although campaign visitor logs show that David Rockefeller also made a personal visit himself, just to make sure. Incredibly, even as late as 2006, a full 3 decades since leaving official government office, Kissinger was revealed to be secretly advising President George Bush throughout the war on Iraq, with Cheney admitting he talked to Kissinger more than anyone else and Bush treating him like a member of the family with a standing invitation to call whenever he was coming to Washington. Even more incredibly, in 2016, just after being feted by Obama for his career of spreading Rockefeller globalism for the deep state ruling class, Henry Kissinger met with Donald Trump to tell him how U.S. foreign policy would really be under a Trump administration.
So, James, just as we're learning today, as we're taping this, at least here in the States, it's May 18th to me, Trump and Kissinger hold foreign policy huddle in New York. Donald Trump met with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in New York, the latest in his efforts to strengthen his foreign policy bona fides. Trump's motorcade rolled into Kissinger's home around 3 p.m., where the low-profile meeting lasted about an hour. Trump aides say the presumptive GOP presidential nominee and 92-year-old diplomat have spoken over the phone multiple times, and that Trump requested the face-to-face.
Sean, how did the Kissinger meeting go? Can you tell us?
Really well.
Really well?
Yeah, they've known each other for a long time, and they talked about China, Russia, other world hotspots, but it was a phenomenal meeting.
China, a country you know so much about. First, Donald Trump has been, he's talked about calling them a currency manipulator immediately. He's talked about being very tough on China. Do you think he will maintain that posture from the campaign, or what will he learn about China as he comes into dealing with it?
Well, I hope he wouldn't maintain the posture during the campaign, literally. There is the impact of globalization. And I wrote minor things about that earlier. Not enough attention was paid to the fact that it was bound to have winners and losers, and that the losers were bound to try to express themselves in some kind of political reaction. In my view, in the present situation, one should not insist on nailing him into positions that he had taken in the campaign on which he doesn't insist. If he insists on them, then of course disagreements will become expressed. But if he develops another program and leaves the question open of what he said in the campaign, one should not make that the decisive element.
You're saying very nicely that we should welcome some flip-flops.
I think we should.
Of course, Rockefeller and his network did not put all of their globalist eggs in the Kissinger basket. Instead, David Rockefeller was the founder, funder, chairman, director and board member of a dizzying array of organizations that he used as fronts to advance his business and political agendas around the globe. When he needed to pry open Latin America for Chase, he founded the Council of the Americas. When he wanted to expand NAFTA into a free trade agreement covering the entire Western Hemisphere, he again used the Council, as well as a number of other organizations he personally founded and funded, to push for the free trade area of the Americas. When he wanted to shape the reconstruction of Europe, in the wake of his good war, he sat on the committee that created the Marshall Plan, which eventually directed $13 billion of US taxpayer money to Rockefeller and his corporate cronies. When he wanted to do the same in Japan, he chaired the Japan Society that his brother had founded. He funneled US trade with the Soviets, in the depth of the Cold War, through Chase using the USSR Trade Council which he founded and directed. And, as always, there were the available infinite resources of the overlapping philanthropic organizations whose boards he sat on, and whose resources he could direct to benefit his own agenda: the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Rockefeller Family Fund, the Rockefeller University and a host of other similar organizations. But there were other, more secretive groups. Groups that Rockefeller helped to establish or direct and draw their membership from the highest reaches of business, financial, government and even royalty. Groups so secret that their very existence was denied for decades. Groups like the Council on Foreign Relations. Although the CFR from its founding in the wake of World War I had been largely directed by interests connected to J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers had been warm to the Council and its interests from the beginning. The Rockefeller influence on the CFR happened when David joined as a member in the 1940s, and by the time he became the director of the organization in 1970, the takeover was complete. And he did all of this while steadily denying all claims of his involvement in a globalization conspiracy.
Here is the Council's annual report published in 1978. The organization's membership list names 1,878 members. And the list reads like a who's who in America. 10 CFR members are U.S. senators. Even more congressmen belong to the organization. Sitting on top of this immensely powerful pyramid, as chairman of the board, is David Rockefeller. As you can see from this page in the CFR annual report, 284 of its members are U.S. government officials. Any organization which can boast that 284 of its members are U.S. government officials should be well known. Yet most Americans have never even heard of the Council on Foreign Relations. One reason why this is so is that 171 journalists, correspondents, and communications executives are also CFR members, and they don't write about the organization. In fact, CFR members rarely talk about the organization inasmuch as it is an express condition of membership that any disclosure of what goes on at CFR meetings shall be regarded as grounds for termination of membership.
Even more secretive and exclusive was the Bilderberg Group. Founded in 1954 by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. The group has brought together the world's richest and most powerful bankers, corporate heads, government officials and royalty from Europe and North America for the past half-century. From the beginning, the conference was an incredibly exclusive affair, and one in which the utmost secrecy was demanded from its participants. Only 73 people attended that first meeting in 1954, including Prince Bernhard, several members of parliament of various European nations, foreign ministers, the former Prime Minister of France, the director of J.P. Morgan, the chairman of Unilever, and other international power players. From within that 73, 10 rapporteurs were selected to introduce the talking points on the agenda and lead group discussion, including, of course, David Rockefeller. Over the 63 years of its existence, the group has hosted discussions that have given birth to the European Union, and, later on, the Euro, planned the 1973 oil crisis, and set the timetable for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, among many other things. The group itself has lived in nearly total obscurity for much of that time, guarded from discovery by the publishers and editors of mainstream media organizations that dutifully complied with the meeting's demand for secrecy from attendees. It wasn't until independent internet-based media outlets began covering the meetings in recent years that the group was forced to start an official website, and conference minutes and even recordings of the very first Bilderberg meeting have been leaked online.
You may wonder why I have asked you to come here. I have in mind a completely frank and open exchange of views, and this is ensured to you, and it is essential for our success. There is no verbatim quotation of anybody, and there is no press, so you're quite free to let yourselves go, if I may say so.
Although as founding member, rapporteur, and steering committee advisor, David had remarkable control over all of this. One of the most exclusive and powerful organizations in the world, remarkably, even that was not good enough for him. Concerned by the lack of Japanese participation in the meetings as Japan grew in economic importance, he lobbied the Bilderberg Conference to begin inviting Japanese members to the meetings. When this was turned down, David promptly started another, equally obscure and equally powerful group, the Trilateral Commission, to fulfill his vision of a North American/European/Japanese conference online.
And then you created the Trilateral Commission, in a sense, to develop relationships with Japan and the rest of the world.
I felt very strongly that Japan had become a major power in the world, and that we culturally had very few relations with them. It seemed to me that was a mistake. And so I tried first to persuade the Bilderberg group, which you've been to and know,
yes,
to include Japan. But they turned that down. They thought the relation with Europe was important and stick to it. So when they turned it down, a group of us started the Trilateral Commission.
And it continues today, and you're going to Japan in April.
Exactly.
Although once again David downplays both his role in the Trilateral Commission and its ultimate significance. It is in fact another group of powerful individuals, including multiple members of every American presidential administration since its founding in 1973, meeting in nearly total obscurity to push Rockefeller's globalist agenda.
Well, the Trilateral Commission, as I mentioned, was started in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, I believe is what really brought Rockefeller to the table at least to pick up Brzezinski as a co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. The subtitle on his book was America's Role in the Technotronic Era. I found out just after I started studying technology that what he meant by the technotronic era was essentially technocracy. It's what we have today. You have to go back and read the book to find it out. But when they got into operation, the first thing they did was to put forth a presidential candidate. That was, of course, remember, they had all the money in the world to put at it, too, with Rockefeller and everybody else around him. They picked up Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale as president vice presidential candidate, got him elected in 1976, the pair of them. Carter then proceeded to sweep into office 1/3 of the membership of the American members of the Trilateral Commission into his top cabinet positions, and a lot of them went into the State Department too. That was an incredible feat, but it wasn't a political coup in my mind. They said that back in those days. Oh no, we're not interested in politics. Well, I really don't think they were. They wanted to get their hands on the economic machinery of the world, and they did that by capturing the United States executive branch. They didn't care about Congress. They didn't care about the judiciary. They only cared about the engine of economic prosperity, if you will, and that was our government. And so the first U.S. trade representative that was appointed to negotiate trade treaties for the president was a member of the Trilateral Commission. In fact, ever since then, there have been 12 different members or 12 different USTRs that have been appointed by the president along the way. That's over a period of a long time. 9 of those 12 have been members of the Trilateral Commission. What can you say to that other than the fact that, well, it tells you what they were after. They wanted to be in a position to have their man negotiating these treaties like NAFTA and CAFTA and the TPP. The current USTR, Michael Froman, who's putting together the Trans-Pacific Partnership and also the Transatlantic coming right behind it, this guy's a member of the Trilateral Commission. When does this stuff stop? You see? Then you have the situation with the World Bank. The president of the World Bank is always appointed by our president. That's how it's set up at Bretton Woods. Europe gets to pick the IMF head, and so they always pick that. But there have been 8 members of the 8 appointees to World Bank since Jimmy Carter. 6 of those have been members of the Trilateral Commission. Now you say, well, what's the big deal with the World Bank? Well, the World Bank has been the major engine of globalization around the world. They had it in their pocket the whole time. You just have to ask the question, okay, they own that position, they own the World Bank, they own the USTR, they own the executive branch, lock, stock, and barrel by and large. Are they looking out after American interests? You know, like just us in America or people in Canada or whatever? I mean, are they looking after our family and even a North American continent? No, they're negotiating for themselves. And what are their goals? Well, they said originally to create a new international economic order.
The Rockefeller fortune. A worldwide network of contacts. The Chase Bank, CFR, Bilderberg, and the Trilateral Commission. And the strict secrecy behind their every move. If the measure of a man is what he does with power, then it should be remarkably simple to take the measure of David Rockefeller. So what precisely did he do with all this power? As he himself freely admitted in his 2002 memoirs, he pleads guilty to all of the radical charges that critics placed on him and his family, likely to lighten the load on his guilt by giving us a chance to figure it all out. This is David's most notable written confession. He is very proud to be the ringleader behind undermining and dismantling the independence of the United States and admits to going against its best interests. He took the world by storm and formulated a brainwashed cult on globalism behind our backs while the working class were distracted by nonsensical entertainment, bread and circus shows on the television and radio. He even used social engineering to get a good majority of young impressionable liberals brainwashed by the globalists' agenda, practically begging to be enslaved by this new world order that is steady approaching on the horizon. But the ultimate consolidation of power, the one world government to be ruled inevitably by the Rockefellers' 4th generation and network of oligarchs and their families, is only one half of this grim dark tale. The one world government agenda is not content merely to consolidate all power, but to use it as a weapon against the masses to control every single thing individuals once had power over. The intimate relationship between the eugenics movement and the Rockefeller family is a dark and largely uncovered part of their history, but it draws a straight line between the Bureau of Social Hygiene, the Eugenics Record Office and other organizations funded and promoted by John D. Rockefeller Jr. on the one hand, and John D. Rockefeller III on the other, who was the founder of the Population Council from the offices and officers of the American Eugenics Society. The topic on the Rockefellers' involvement in eugenics deserves its own special, so it is something we'll go heavy into detail in the next presentation. But you need to understand and wake up to the fact that for many decades these wealthy globalists have been spending millions of dollars in research and planning to engineer a new age society which grants all reproductive control over to their authority. They cautiously mask this plan under words like sustainable development, new order, or population control, but we will show you what their hidden agenda is with the evidence we've connected. Simply put, they do not want the working class to have the power to procreate without proper licensing and submission to their monitoring over what kind of genes are coming into this world. Traditional family life is under siege, and this will be the very next discussion to outline, where we will trace over all this evidence. One of the saddest experiences for us in conducting this research has been watching helplessly as our innocent society apathetically goes on about their daily lives in ignorance, not truly understanding what is about to happen to their near future up ahead. Few have connected the dots and most have not paid close attention to detail of the mass culling off of populations in third world countries. And this is exactly how David socially engineered you all to behave, so that this would be much easier for him to set up all of these years without public attention. But he did not successfully blindfold everyone.
Rockefellers, come back. We don't want your new world order, you know? Leave Chile right now. Leave Chile. You are not... You're killing a lot of people! You're killing a lot of people! Leave here! Leave Chile right now! Leave Chile! Leave Chile! We don't want your world government! Leave Chile right now! Leave Chile, okay? Leave Chile! Your family is the most disgusting in the world, you know?
Rockefeller, we know what you're doing. We know what you're doing to the world. Rockefeller, your new world order will never come in. You're running out of time. Scumbag, you've rushed it. You screwed up. You're not going to stop the Irish, Rockefeller, you scumbag. We are the Irish. We know what you're up to, Rockefeller.
So let us measure the man on how he used his power. Worse even than the tyrant dictator who openly rules his people by decree without surprise, is the manipulator who rules cowardly in the shadows. Worse than the miser is the philanthropist who directs his gifts to favor his own interests. Worse than the open enemy of humanity is its false friend who smiles and speaks gently for show when the camera is aimed on him, and then betrays the public in his international affairs when the cameras are off. But his death is no means for celebration. The fight is far from over. Because what David Rockefeller did was he enabled our entire system to be hijacked by anyone of royalty around the globe to finish where he left off. Likely was the plan to use him and his money as a tool of their extension. Now he is dead, and the throne of the world's stage is wide open for anyone with even more power and influence to take over our lives. You see, what David did was he undermined your rightful place in being involved in the conversation and election on the kind of future you are going to be living in. He sold you out to internationalists without your consent. He treated all of us as if our voice did not matter, as if him and his network automatically knew what would be best for all of us. But you soon will see just how flawed his utopian vision was, from the very beginning. David's work confirms the existence of a secret society. We hope now you can recognize the warning signs. In the next presentation we will go over all of the Rockefellers' crimes. All the lives murdered or destroyed by the cause and effect of their decision changes and false flag operations. But most importantly we'll go over their agenda for population control and the evidence that suggests its grim nature. Thank you for watching and be wary of what the surviving members of the Rockefeller family are preparing in the wake of their father and grandfather's death. They are going to continue to try to convince the public that David was really a hero to everyone. And continue to call all of these facts we presented as conspiracy theories taken out of context. You can count on this. We are anonymous, we are legion. We do not forgive, we do not forget. Expect us.
The Rockefeller family's commitments to the United Nations did not end with this exceptional gift. It continues to the present day, and it is personified by David Rockefeller, whom we honor for his dedication to democratic principle, for his dedication to development, and for his dedication to international peace.
You possess the power to impact the global narrative and to be part of the history. Please share this report, and to be the first to see more videos like this, click the subscribe link below.